in conversation with Leonora Langley, who's the author of Let the Souls of Our Children Sing. This book is available at W.H. Smith, Amazon, Austin Macaulay Publishers Limited, Waterstones, and various good bookshops. Hello, Leonora, how are you?
Good afternoon, Paddy. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Feeling slightly, a little bit tired, but I think a coffee's in order in a bit, but more or less refreshed after the weekend. What about yourself?
Yes, I'm fine. Thank you so much.
We appreciate you putting the time aside to speak to us, because I can imagine you're a very busy lady. So I thought I'd start off by asking you to tell us a little bit about the book, first of all.
Well, I suppose what made me write the book was that when I was young, I had a feeling that I felt that children didn't really have a voice, that they weren't always being listened to. And when I was a student teacher in my 20s, and I faced a class of 30 6- and 7-year-olds, they seemed so vulnerable and impressionable, but above all, sort of at the mercy of their parents and teachers. And I felt I was witnessing quite a lot of injustice. But it wasn't until later, when I became a parent and counsellor and worked at the rock face of some very challenging schools as a teacher, that I felt more qualified to write this book. And I felt I really needed to have a really rounded experience because it's quite a challenging book to write, and not many authors would go to this subject.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did hear an interview with you a couple of days ago. I had a listen. I was online and just having a listen just to see, because I was quite intrigued. And I know you're speaking about children, bringing out the self-awareness in children so they're in touch with themselves, because children rely a lot, don't they, on the all these computer gadgets. We've got Facebook and various social media sites, so it's getting children to come out with their authentic, natural, talented self. Would that be a good way to would that be a fair statement?
That's very good indeed, Paddy. I really believe that the role of parents as educators is paramount, obviously, at the very beginning of children's lives. They need to let their children know that they're loved unconditionally simply because they exist. So children need to receive unconditional love, sort of without restriction. In conditional love, it's earned, but in unconditional love, it's given freely. So I suppose that's what we all yearn for, from the cradle to the grave, really, is that sort of emotional food, that we need to receive that love in the early stage of our lives, particularly the first 18 months of life, in order to find satisfaction in future intimate relationships. And of course that includes a relationship with our authentic, sometimes forsaken self.
I hear what you're saying, and I think there's more knowledge on that now, isn't there, than there used to be. There's a lot more education and stuff. Absolutely.
Of course there is. It's interesting that street artist Banksy said, a lot of parents will do anything for their kids except let them be themselves, which is quite an amusing statement in a way, but it's also quite serious. I think quite often parents have a tendency, and I think we all do this, to want to create offspring in our own image as an extension of ourselves. And sometimes this comes with a bit of control that we want to inflict on the very being of our children. Of course, children need parental guidance to set boundaries and help develop their skills, but children, I think, also need time and space to grow into themselves, to connect with their higher authentic self and what's unique in them, an individual. And if children aren't allowed to express their feelings and emotions very early on, their lives can be quite painful, because it tends to be a long process of self-discovery.
Absolutely. It can take years and years and years. And it's only recently that I've started discovering myself, in my, older years, or slightly older years. But, there's geniuses, isn't there? When children are born, there's a genius there, isn't there? There's a genius in some way. Everyone's talented at something, aren't they?
Absolutely. I believe in the gifts and the talents of all children, Paddy. It's intrinsic in them, and as parents and educators, we need to bring it out. I've never met a child that didn't have a gift for something.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, my grandfather was quite old school, so when we was growing up, and obviously he didn't have the knowledge, but he was always trying to push me towards sports, you know, like the football and stuff like that, and it weren't really stuff I was into as a kid, but he probably just thought, well, you know, he's a young boy, he should be playing football more. I think it was just like you say, the lack of knowledge.
Yes, indeed. Well, I suppose most people, if they've led lives, unfulfilled lives, then they want the next generation to fulfill what they weren't able to do, which is a bit sad in a way, because every child is individual. And what's happening, if that happens, Paddy, what happens is that children tend to learn to switch off from their feelings, or they sort of armour themselves from them. And because we live in a patriarchal society, which has tended to discourage the expression of tender qualities such as gentleness, empathy, humility and sensitivity, then boys in particular, I think, are going to suffer. So we've encouraged boys to armour their vulnerabilities, disguise or hide them behind a rigid mask of self-reliance. But what we need to do is to break these gender stereotypes and acknowledge that boys are allowed to cry. Big boys don't cry is a ridiculous concept, because tears release endorphins which block pain receptors and produce an essential anaesthetic to help them cope with the worst of their grief and grievances.
Absolutely. When you cry, it's a reset, isn't it? You know, it's a reset, an emotional reset for your body, I think.
Of course it is, yeah. And yet all humans have the same propensity for deep emotional response. So I think we possibly need to focus more on the shared characteristics between boys and girls, what it is to be human, rather than what divides them and reinforces their difference.
Makes total sense. It's bringing out the, like you say, the self-awareness in children so they're in touch with themselves rather than relying on the outside validation and the outside stereotypes that may come from different directions, and that sort of keep a stiff upper lip and don't show emotion and just get on with it, because I did when I was younger. You know, I've heard that before from parents and aunties and uncles. Well, we just got on with it, so you should too as well.
That's right. But it's sort of okay in a way, and it's what we've been used to for generations. But I think since the pandemic, Paddy, we need new protocols, and especially in our schools. Since the 1870s, our education system has barely moved away from the Victorian ethic, a 19th century model of too much emphasis on cognition and logic, which can be counted and measured, over the emotional development of children and the nurturing of their souls. That's what's so important, because that's beyond measure. You know, for the past 150 years, there have been two main aims of education: the transmission of a body of knowledge and cultural values from one generation to another, and then, of course, we need the creation of a productive workforce. But I think education needs to be about the development of self-actualization and a true sense of self-belief, self-compassion, self-awareness, and even self-love, where we integrate the physical, intellectual, social, spiritual, and emotional.
And all those things you've mentioned there.
It's all too competitive, Paddy. It's too mechanical, it's too prescriptive, and it can be soul-destroying for children. And of course, likewise, it can be soul-destroying for the teachers who are having to deliver it. Yeah, because, like you say, if you're bringing the authentic talents out of each individual child, because everyone's different, everyone's got a different talent, rather than saying, right, you all have to behave like this, then that would maximise their potential for the future anyway, wouldn't it? Absolutely. It's very hard because you've got 30 children in a class. I'm not talking about something a bit idealistic here. But what needs to be integral to all learning is the development of internal resources that our children can draw upon in terms of inevitable adversity and challenge. Their current addiction to computers and social media, it places too much emphasis on external validation. And then this hyperstimulation that they go through causes a cycle, which leads to the overproduction of cortisol, causing anxiety, depression and stress.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is not something that we're saying without, founded proof, because it's even been in the news, hasn't it? Recently, it's been in the news that, it can draw you in, getting the likes, getting the notifications on social media. Oh, I've got another like on my picture, or I've got another like on my status. And younger people can be drawn into that, where everything seems to sort of revolve around how many likes I get on a post or a picture on the socials.
Of course. But
from a young
children
age.
need more opportunities to be calm and serene and more focused through greater emphasis on the arts, meditation, mindfulness, taking a nature walk, convening with nature, forest school and forest bathing, which bring down the cortisol level. It's a bit sad, Paddy, that some parents seem to have no idea that their children are experiencing mental health issues. Children are very good at hiding it, and
Absolutely.
they tend to share it on social media. So it's encouraged the young away from confiding in their parents, and they're bonding with their peers who have similar negative thoughts, and that sort of excludes the parental influence. And this is quite worrying in terms of safeguarding.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're not knocking any, methods that parents use. We know parents love their children unconditionally, or do their best.
Do.
But it's just this knowledge is something that's becoming more widespread as we move forward, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's a whole new dimension to parenting. And it's as if parenting isn't challenging enough. It's always been challenging. But now we've got like this third party. And that's really sad, because the most important thing, Paddy, I think, we come into the world as sentient beings, feeling beings, and we're human beings, not human doings. So I think we need to encourage our children to be carefree, sort of in the careless rapture of childhood. Otherwise they miss out, they're forced to grow up too soon, and the whole thing becomes a bit sad. Childhood is so precious, so very precious, and I feel passionate about it, and it's something that I needed to put into a book, and it's amazing the response I've had to it from both parents and educators.
I can imagine.
Yeah,
I can imagine.
So I'm really proud of my book. I'm very humbled by it, because it sort of came through me rather than, although I obviously did spend the time writing it, I feel like I was sort of a conduit for it. And I really hope it will make a wonderful Christmas present for parents or for grandparents to give to their children.
Absolutely. And before we pop into a song, because I've got some travel and stuff to squeeze in, I want to just remind people, I mentioned it earlier, but we can remind people where they can get this book if they wish to do so.
Okay, so most of my sales seem to be on Amazon.
Yeah.
Or through Austin Macaulay, my publishers, but you can also get it from every single major bookseller like W.H. Smith and Waterstones, and it's at a very reasonable price, $8.99 for the paperback book and only £3.50 for the e-book. I wanted to make it accessible to absolutely everyone, Paddy, so this is why I didn't write it for materialistic gain, because I know the root of children's happiness isn't through materialism.
Yeah, well, you've been there, you've taught yourself, so you've been there, haven't you? You've seen it yourself.
I've taught for 30 years, and I've been a counsellor for 15, and I was an international journalist in my youth, so I come from many different points of view on this subject.
It's been really interesting talking to you. We'll have to wrap it up very shortly, as we've got to squeeze some travel in and news and stuff like that. But thank you for taking the time to speak to us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. And we wish you every success with further sales of the book.
Many thanks indeed, Paddy. You seem to be engaged in the subject that interests you too, which is always very lovely.
I'll keep you on the line when we go into a song, and I can get some details from you, okay? Thank you very much to Leonora for speaking to us. Leonora Langley, the author of Let the Souls of Our Children Sing. It was really interesting having a conversation with her. Get that interview up on our website very soon.